My research journal slipped from my hands, pages scattering across the polished oak floor of my father's study, drifting and fluttering like broken thoughts. Some pages slid under his desk, others rested beneath the leather armchairs, as though even my work, my life's work, was trying to hide in the corners of this house. And then I saw it. Leaning against Father's massive mahogany desk stood a brand new canvas, wrapped only hours ago and delivered straight from the artist's studio. The Montclair family portrait, at first glance, my breath caught in my throat. There I was, or rather, there I barely was, painted into the background, swallowed by shadows, almost blending into the dark wood panelling of the study. Father stood, tall and centered, his posture commanding, his chest broad and proud. Mother, refined and elegant as always, was arranged at his side, the picture of quiet strength. And then there was my younger sister, Aurora, glowing in a golden haze of light. The artist had framed her like she was the sun itself, radiant, untouchable, the clear centerpiece of our family's future. Me, I was a shadow, an afterthought. Oh, Celeste, I didn't realize you were in here. Mother's voice carried softly from the doorway. I didn't turn immediately. My eyes stayed fixed on the small handwritten note etched in the corner of the canvas, the artist's instruction, as requested by the Montclair family central focus on Aurora. The words burned into me. They weren't just about brushstrokes or composition. They were confirmation of what I had always known. The portrait came early, I said finally, my voice sounding steadier than the trembling in my fingers. Just in time for tonight's dinner celebration. Mother stepped into the study, her heels clicking gently against the floor, her graceful figure gliding beside me. She wore the soft smile I had seen countless times, the kind she reserved for public moments, pleasant, polite, but never truly warm. Eleanor really captured our essence, she said, nodding at the painting dot. Our essence. The words made my stomach twist, as though my fading into the shadows was not only acceptable, but essential, a core part of who we were as a family. I remembered 3 weeks earlier, when we'd sat around the dining table discussing this very portrait. Father had spoken with the kind of finality that left no room for challenge. Aurora will be featured prominently, he said. She is the future of Montclair Enterprises. No one questioned him. No one glanced in my direction. Later, as we cleared the dishes, Mother touched my arm gently. Wear something simple for the portrait sitting, dear, she suggested, her tone sweet but firm, so you don't distract from your sister. Now, staring at the finished painting, I understood. What she had really meant, not just simple, invisible. The question slipped from my lips before I could stop it. Why am I painted in the shadows, Mother? Why am I made to disappear? It wasn't anger in my voice, not yet. It was genuine, childlike curiosity. After 32 years, I knew open defiance only led to doors slamming shut. But I had to ask. Mother sighed softly and lifted a hand to adjust her pearl earring, as if my words were an inconvenience she'd rather not dwell on. Don't be dramatic. Celeste, we all have our roles. Yours just isn't in the spotlight. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a stone to the chest. Memories rushed through me in fragment science fairs. I had one where no one showed up to cheer me on. Research breakthroughs that earned polite nods and little more years of accomplishments. That disappeared in the shadow of Aurora's more glamorous, more marketable ones. This wasn't new. It was simply painted in oil and framed in gold now. I forced my hands to steady, pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the portrait. Mother's? Head turned sharply, her voice suddenly sharper. What are you doing? Before I could answer, Father's footsteps echoed down the hallway. The sound was heavy, deliberate, the way it always was when he wanted to make his presence known. A moment later, he strode into the study, his sharp eyes immediately finding the portrait. "Excellent," he said with a satisfied smile. "It's here." He circled the canvas slowly, inspecting it with approval. "Aurora will love this. Where is she? Someone find Aurora." He hadn't even looked at me. Not once. Mother glanced at me out of the corner of her eye, a silent command written in her expression: "Don't make a scene. Not before tonight's unveiling." I bent down to gather my scattered research notes, sliding the pages back into the worn leather of my journal. My movements were calm, deliberate. Inside, I felt something different, something that surprised even me. Resignation. This portrait wasn't a shock. It was simply proof of what I had always known. I was the Montclair daughter meant to exist in. The margins, allowed to remain, yes, but only if I stayed quiet. Only if I didn't ask for recognition. Father was already talking about the placement of the portrait for the event. How the lighting should hit Aurora just right. His voice filled the study, authoritative and commanding. I listened in silence. I pushed back now. If I broke the unspoken rules, I knew what it could cost me. The grant money for my lab, for my team's salaries, was tied directly to my father's foundation. He didn't need to threaten me. The consequences had always spoken loud enough. I tucked my journal under my arm and straightened my spine. And then, clarity. The portrait wasn't a revelation. It was a mirror, a reflection of the truth I had always lived. To them, I wasn't equal. I wasn't light. I was a shadow. The real question, the only question, was whether I would continue to accept that role. And for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't sure that I would. Half an hour later, I found myself outside Aurora's study. My hand hovered above the doorknob, my pulse quickening for reasons I couldn't explain. All I needed was to borrow her leather portfolio for tonight's unveiling. A simple errand that shouldn't have felt so heavy. Through the thick mahogany door, I heard her voice, clear, practiced, confident. Double quote, "Yes, just feature me and Dad in the magazine spread," she said. I froze, my hand falling from the knob. "My sister isn't really part of the company narrative," Aurora continued, her voice as smooth as honey. "We want to focus on the direct line of succession. Readers of Business Frontier won't care about a researcher who isn't involved in day-to-day operations." The blood drained from my face. My knees weakened until I had to steady myself against the wall. I had always suspected. I had felt it. In the way conversations hushed when I walked into a room, in the sideways glances at corporate events, in the omissions that seemed too consistent to be accidents. But hearing it spoken aloud, so casually, so matter of fact, it was like a knife, twisting inside me. Not oversight. Not FORGETFULNESS. Policy. When I finally returned to my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, numbness spreading through me. Memories I had stored neatly away rearranged themselves, taking on new meaning in light of what I'd heard. The company newsletters that left out my research, the annual reports that erased my contributions, the introductions at dinners where I was my other daughter, while Aurora was the future leader of Montclair Enterprises. Not mistakes, deliberate choices, a lifetime of erasure. That evening, the pre-unveiling dinner stretched before me like an elegant minefield. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above white linen, the air thick with expensive perfume and polite laughter. Mother had arranged the seating with surgical precision. Father, Mother, and Aurora were gathered at the head table with Thomas Reynolds, the editor of Business Frontier. I was tucked near the end, between Cousin Edith, who was nearly deaf, and Uncle Robert, who had asked me about my college plans for 15 years. Despite my having earned a doctorate and leading a research team, I should have been used to it by now. But something in me was starting to shift. When Father raised his glass to announce Aurora's promotion to Executive Vice President, the applause around the table swelled. I clapped too, my hands moving automatically, but inside, I felt hollow. This wasn't new. It was just the next step. And then Mother, with a graceful flourish, presented the family heirloom, the Montclair sapphires, passed down for generations to women who led with distinction. She fastened them around Aurora's neck as if the necklace had been made for her. The sapphires my grandmother once told me would someday be mine, because I had the Montclair intelligence. Now they gleamed against Aurora's collarbone, reflecting the light of the chandelier as though they had always belonged to her. My throat tightened. I told myself not to react. Not here, not now. But when Reynolds, the editor, turned politely toward me and asked, "And you are?" as though I were some stranger who had stumbled into his dinner party, the air left my lungs. I had sat across from him at 3 charity galas. We had spoken about his daughter's college plans, and still I was unrecognizable to him, invisible at Aurora. Leaned in smoothly before I could answer. "This is my sister, Celeste. She does some research the foundation supports." Some research. As though mapping neural responses to targeted therapies was a hobby. As though my life's work could be reduced to a line in a footnote. I smiled politely, my muscles aching from the effort, and listened as Reynolds turned back to Father, uninterested in whatever I might have said. For the rest of the dinner, I stayed silent, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my truffle untouched on the dessert plate. But inside me, the silence was cracking. The applause from dinner still echoed faintly in my ears as I slipped away from the dining hall, my footsteps quiet against the marble floor. My family was still laughing at the head table, basking in the afterglow of Aurora's new title and the glittering sapphires around her throat. My absence wouldn't be noticed, not tonight. I wandered through the house, the Montclair estate, that had been my childhood home and now felt like a museum of things I was never meant to touch. Oil paintings of our ancestors watched from the walls, their stern faces a reminder that duty, legacy, and reputation always came before individuality. For Aurora, those expectations became crowns. For me, they became chains. I paused outside Father's study. The door was slightly ajar, a thin line of golden light spilling into the hallway. Voices drifted through, low at first, then sharper, more distinct. Aurora's voice. "You saw the portrait, didn't you?" she said, her tone brimming with satisfaction. Father's deeper voice followed. "Of course. Eleanor did exactly what we asked. You're the focal point. That's how it should be." A silence. Then Aurora again, softer, but with that unmistakable edge of calculation. Celeste seemed unsettled. "Did you notice?" Father gave a short laugh. "She adjusts. She always does. She knows her place. Her research is valuable, yes, but it doesn't define this family's legacy." My chest tightened. Aurora pressed on. "As long as the foundation continues funding her lab, she'll stay quiet. She wouldn't risk that." The words slid into me like cold steel. Not only had they erased me from the painting, from the magazine spread, from the public narrative, they knew exactly why I stayed silent. They counted on it. I pressed my back against the wall, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a long moment, I wanted to burst into the study, slam the door wide open, and demand to know how they could speak so casually about dismantling me piece by piece. But the image of my research team, 10 brilliant minds who trusted me to lead them, who depended on the foundation's funding for their salaries and equipment, flashed in my mind. If I jeopardized that tonight, I wouldn't just be punishing myself. I would be punishing them. I forced myself to breathe slowly, silently, and stepped away from the doorway. My feet carried me down the hall to my childhood bedroom, where the pale blue walls and antique canopy bed still stood untouched, as though time had frozen in this corner of the estate. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, my phone still in hand. The photo of the portrait glowed on my screen, My shadowed figure stared back at me, a smear in the background, a supporting role in my own family story. For 32 years, I had accepted my place quietly, telling myself that recognition didn't matter, that my research was enough. But tonight, after hearing Aurora, after seeing the sapphires gleam against her collarbone, I felt the weight of every silence, every swallowed protest, every erased line of my existence. And for the first time, silence felt like betrayal, not of them, of myself. The next morning, I returned to the city earlier than planned. The unveiling of the portrait was still scheduled for that evening, but I told Mother I had work to finish in the lab. She didn't question me. She never did when I mentioned research. To her, my work existed in a separate, unimportant sphere. Back at my apartment, I spread my journals, hard drives, and old files across the dining table. For hours, I combed through everything: emails, corporate reports, event photos, press clippings. Each document was a puzzle piece. Each omission a pattern dot in one annual report from 3 years ago. A breakthrough in targeted neural mapping was credited to the Montclair Foundation Research Division without a single mention of my name. I had led that study. It had taken 5 years. In another press release, Aurora was quoted as spearheading new medical innovation initiatives, though she had never once set foot inside my lab, at gala after gala. My name was omitted from captions, replaced with vague phrases. And family, the Montclair daughters, supporting researchers, it wasn't just oversight, it was systematic. A quiet erasure, executed with precision. I stared at the growing pile of evidence and felt something shift inside me. For years, I had believed my silence was survival. Now, I began to see it for what it truly was: compliance. Every omission I ignored, every slight I swallowed, had given them permission to keep erasing me. And yet, anger alone wasn't enough. Anger burned hot and fast, but it didn't change systems. If I was going to step out of the shadows, I would need more than rage. I would need strategy. By noon, I had outlined my plan in the back pages of my journal. Not a full rebellion, not yet, but small, deliberate steps. Step 1, documentation. I would collect everything: reports, photographs, contracts, emails, a record of every time I had been erased, overshadowed, misrepresented. Step 2, witnesses. People who had seen my work firsthand, who could vouch for me if questions were raised. Former colleagues, research assistants, even journalists who had attended my lectures. Step 3, timing. I wouldn't waste my voice shouting into the void. If I was going to confront them, it would be at a moment when silence would be impossible. And that moment, I realized with a slow, steady certainty, was tonight. The unveiling, the portrait they were so proud of, the painting they planned to reveal before family, investors, and press. If I was going to step into the light, it had to be then. The afternoon blurred in a haze of preparations. I printed documents, highlighted notes, organized photographs into folders. At one point, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because I looked different, but because my eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Resolve. For so long, I had been careful, cautious, always protecting the fragile balance between belonging and erasure. Tonight, I no longer wanted to belong. I wanted to be seen. Back at the Montclair estate, the ballroom glittered with opulence. Tall arrangements of white orchids stood on every table. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers, and the portrait, still veiled in a rich velvet cloth, waited on its easel at the front of the room. Guests filled the space, their conversations rising and falling like waves. Investors, partners, socialites, distant relatives, all gathered to witness Aurora's latest crowning moment. I stood near the back, my folder clutched tightly against my chest, watching as Aurora moved gracefully. Through the crowd, she wore a gown the color of champagne, the sapphires catching every flicker of light. She looked every inch the heir apparent. Father stood at her side, greeting guests with booming confidence. Mother floated nearby, her polite smile never faltering. No one looked at me, and yet, for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a storm building on the horizon. When Father finally stepped forward to address the crowd, a hush fell over the room. He spoke of legacy, of heritage, of Aurora's new role in carrying the Montclair name into the future. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Then, with a flourish, he gestured to the veiled portrait. Tonight, we unveil a piece of art that captures not only our family, but the essence of who we are and who we will continue to be. A servant pulled the velvet cloth away. Gasps echoed softly as the painting was revealed. Aurora glowed in golden light. Father stood proud, Mother elegant, and I barely there, a smear of shadow in the background. I heard murmurs, guests whispering, a few confused glances cast in my direction. The humiliation should have burned, but instead I felt strangely calm, because tonight, for the first time, I was ready. I tightened my grip on the folder. My voice trembled in my chest, not with fear, but with power waiting to be released. This was no longer about being acknowledged at the dinner table. This was about rewriting the narrative my family had built without me. And as the room settled into applause, I stepped forward, toward the light. The applause washed over me like a tide, but I didn't move with it, while the crowd clapped politely. At the portrait's unveiling, my body stayed still, rooted in place. My heart pounded against my ribs, my palms damp around the folder I held close. Aurora stood at the front of the room, basking in the glow of admiration. Her golden gown shimmered. Under the chandeliers, the Montclair sapphires glittering at her throat. Father beamed beside her, his pride radiating through the air. Mother smiled with practiced grace, her hand resting lightly on Aurora's arm. And me. I stood half-hidden near the back, just as I was painted blurred, invisible, but not for much. Longer, I drew in a breath, sharp and steady, and stepped forward. At first, no one noticed. The guests were still clapping, their attention locked on the glowing centerpiece of the portrait. But then a few heads turned, conversations paused. A ripple of curiosity spread across the room as I moved slowly down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the polished marble. Aurora saw me first. Her smile flickered, then returned, tighter this time, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Father's jaw tensed, though his applause never faltered. Mother's hand stilled on Aurora's arm. I reached the front, just beside the easel, and turned to face the crowd. My folder trembled in my hands, not from weakness, but from the sheer energy coursing through me. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear, carrying farther than I expected. "I'd like to say a few words." A murmur ran through the audience. Guests glanced at one another, uncertain. It wasn't unusual for family members to make speeches at Montclair events, but this hadn't been planned. Not by them, anyway. Father stepped forward quickly, his smile fixed but his eyes sharp. "Celeste," he said smoothly, his voice pitched just low enough for me to hear the warning in it. "Now isn't the time." I met his gaze. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. "It's exactly the time." I turned back to the crowd, opening my folder. The papers rustled like wings spreading. "This portrait," I began, gesturing to the canvas behind me, "is meant to represent the Montclair family. But if you look closely, you'll see something else. You'll see what happens when one story is elevated at the expense of another. You'll see erasure." Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes darted between me and the painting. Aurora stepped forward, her tone light, almost mocking. "Celeste, don't be ridiculous. It's just art, symbolism. You're overthinking it." I lifted one of the documents from my folder, holding it up for the crowd to see. "Is it symbolism?" I asked, "when my name is removed from a research paper I authored?" A hush fell. I pulled another sheet. "Is it symbolism when a press release credits initiatives to my sister that she has never once participated in?" I laid the papers on the edge of the easel, one after another, the evidence stacking higher with each page. This isn't just a painting. This is a pattern. A deliberate decision, year after year, to paint me out of the Montclair narrative. The murmurs grew louder now, whispers carrying across the ballroom. Father's smile had vanished, his expression hardening into stone. "Celeste," he said firmly, "you are embarrassing yourself. Sit down." My hands clenched tighter around the folder. "No," I said, my voice steady, resonant. "I have been sitting down my entire life. Tonight I stand." Aurora's composure cracked, her cheeks flushing. "You're twisting things. Everyone here knows you've always been supported. Your research exists because of this family." I looked at her, the words leaving me like a blade. "My research exists in spite of this family?" Gasps echoed again. Aurora blinked, stunned into silence. Father's eyes blazed. Mother reached out as though to stop me, but I stepped back, away from her hand. "For 32 years, I said, turning back to the guests, "I have been told that my role is not to shine, but to stand in the shadows, that my value is in silence, in obedience, in staying small so that someone else could stand tall, and I accepted it. I believed that was survival. But survival at the cost of truth is not survival at all. It's surrender." The ballroom was silent now, every eye fixed on me. I opened the final section of the folder, pulling free a photograph. It was one of my lab, my team gathered around the new neural mapping equipment we had purchased, just 6 months earlier. Their faces glowed with pride, with hope. "These people," I said softly, holding the photo high, "have dedicated their lives to discovery, to pushing the boundaries of what medicine can achieve. They do it not for legacy, not for spotlight, but for humanity. And every step we've taken forward has been diminished, erased, or reassigned because my family decided that only one Montclair name deserved to be remembered." I turned toward the portrait, toward the shadowed version of myself painted into the background, no more. The silence broke into scattered applause, tentative at first, uncertain, then louder, swelling as more voices joined. Not everyone clapped. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered in hushed tones, but enough to make the ground feel different beneath my feet. Aurora's face was pale now, her smile brittle. Father stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. Mother's eyes glistened, though I couldn't tell if it was anger, fear, or something else entirely. I closed the folder and let the weight of it rest in my arms. My voice softened, though it carried just as clearly. "I will no longer live as a shadow in a family portrait. If I am erased here, I will write myself elsewhere. If my name is stripped from this narrative, I will build my own." I paused, the words catching in my throat, then released them like a vow. "I will not disappear." The applause rose again, stronger this time, filling the ballroom. Guests turned toward me with new eyes, some supportive, some cautious, but none indifferent. For the first time, I was seen. The aftermath unfolded quickly, though to me it felt like slow motion. Father stormed from the stage, his voice low and venomous as he barked orders at the staff. Aurora followed, her heels clicking furiously against the floor, her gown swirling behind her like a flame. Mother lingered, her hand pressed to her lips, her gaze flickering between me and the portrait, as though something inside her had cracked. I remained where I was, rooted beneath the weight of the chandelier's light, the applause still echoing. In my ears, the portrait loomed behind me, frozen in oil, the Montclairs, as they wanted to be seen. But tonight, for the first time, the room had seen something else, the truth, later. As the ballroom emptied and staff began clearing glasses from the tables, I stood alone before the painting. My painted self still hovered in the shadows, barely. There, but as I stared, I realized something. It no longer hurt the way it had before, because tonight I had stepped into the light without their permission. And once you step into the light, you can never truly go back. September always made the vineyard look like a postcard. Sunlight poured over the hills, the grapes swollen and ready for harvest, the air humming with cicadas and the faint sweetness of ripening fruit. But that year I saw none of the beauty. To me, the vineyard looked like a battlefield. The family emergency meeting I'd forced them into had shaken their image of control, but Daniel wasn't done. He filed an injunction against me, accusing me of sabotaging investor contracts. When my lawyer, Michelle, called to tell me, her tone was calm, but mine wasn't. "He's suing me?" I asked, pacing my apartment. "He's trying," Michelle said. "It's weak, it won't hold. But you need to understand, your brother is cornered, and a cornered man doesn't act rationally." I believed her. That night, I came home to the faint smell of smoke. I stepped onto my balcony and froze. Down below, the dumpster behind my building smoldered, firefighters hosing it down. The chief found me watching. Someone dumped shredded papers, doused them in lighter fluid. Definitely deliberate. I ran back inside, my heart pounding. The copies of the vineyard emails I'd hidden in my closet were gone. Daniel had been here the next morning. I shoved my last untouched folder across Michelle's desk. "He's escalating," I said, my voice shaking. "Then so do we," she replied. "We stop using the threat of charges as leverage. We file fraud, forgery, identity theft. This ends in court." For weeks, I'd clung to the faint hope of reconciliation. But Daniel's fire had burned away the last of that illusion. I wasn't saving this family anymore. I was saving myself. The courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Reporters clustered outside, cameras flashing. Inside, Daniel sat with my parents on either side, their faces carved from stone. The judge asked him to present his evidence. He launched into a speech, waving letters and spreadsheets, painting me as jealous, vindictive, bent on destroying the family. "She's sabotaging us," he said, his voice rising. "She wants the vineyard to fail because she never belonged in it." When he finished, Michelle rose. "Your Honor, my client submits Exhibits A through F." She laid the proof before the court, the emails, the forged mortgage, the bank records. The murmurs from the gallery grew louder with each page. The judge read. Daniel slammed his fist against the table. "Lies." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Carter, you'll control yourself in this courtroom." For the first time, Daniel's swagger crumbled. He looked small, cornered, exposed. The injunction was denied. My fraud complaint was accepted. My father stormed out before the judge finished speaking. My mother trailed behind him, pale and silent. Daniel stayed slumped in his chair, staring at nothing. The Carter vineyard never recovered. Investors fled, banks pulled out, and the scandal spread through the valley like wildfire. Neighbors whispered. Old friends stopped visiting. The vineyard, gates once open for tastings, stayed locked. For decades, they'd built their identity on a single word: legacy. But legacies built on lies don't last. Weeks later, I drove my grandmother back to her cottage after a doctor's appointment. She was weaker now, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done something I never could," she said, gripping my hand. "You broke free." Tears stung my eyes. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Maybe, maybe not. But forgiveness is their burden. Freedom is yours." I kissed her cheek before leaving. 2 months later, I stood on the porch of a small cabin near Lake Tahoe, the one I'd saved 6 years for. The deed was in my name alone. The key felt heavy and solid in my pocket. I stepped inside, the air smelling of pine and fresh paint. No vineyard shadows here, no expectations. Just me. I opened a bottle of wine, not Carter wine, but from a tiny independent vineyard I'd discovered on a road trip. I poured a glass, lifted it, toward the window where the lake shimmered silver. In the autumn sun, 2 new legacies, I whispered. The Carters had tried to chain me to theirs, but legacy isn't what you inherit. Legacy is what you choose, and I had finally chosen mine.